tributes to Nelson Mandela fill the media with stories of his lengthy prison term and his willingness to forgive his oppressors. Nowhere in sight is the real story of Nelson Mandela and the African National Congress that he headed, a story that's best told by Naomi Klein in a wonderful book called The Shock Doctrine. The ANC's Freedom Charter, adopted in June 26, 1955, in Kliptown, South Africa, begins with the promise, "The people shall govern." It promises land to the landless, equality, free and compulsory education, freedom of movement, and more. From prison, Mandela wrote a note to his supporters in January of 1990, a month before his release, and here's part of what he wrote. "The nationalization of the mines, banks, and monopoly industries is the policy of the ANC, and the change or modification of our views in this regard is inconceivable. Black economic empowerment is a goal we fully support and encourage, but in our situation, state control of certain sectors of the economy is unavoidable." In the 1980s, young black South Africans, weary from 3 decades of patience, took to the streets to fight for their beloved Freedom Charter. When Mandela was released from prison after 27 years on February the 11th, 1990, most of those years spent on Robben Island off the coast of Cape Town in South Africa, the ANC and he appeared ripe to fulfill their dreams, the dream of the Freedom Charter. Great expectations. Yet South Africa took the route characterized by Mandela as inconceivable: political succession, economic ruin. South Africa is now amongst the most unequal societies in the world. World attention focused on the high-profile political talks between the ANC's Mandela and F.W. de Klerk, leader of the National Party. The ANC was determined to win this political fight, and de Klerk had the guns and the money. But Mandela had millions of people with him. The lower-profile economic negotiations under the ANC's Thabo Mbeki were disastrous. Mandela's government fell victim to a process pioneered in Chile before the government was taken over by the democratically elected democracy-proofing of capitalism. Key sectors of economic decision-making, such as trade policy and the role of the central bank, were portrayed by the de Klerk government as technical or administrative. Control of these power centers was handed to supposedly impartial experts, such as officials from the IMF and the World Bank, in a balkanization strategy. A constitutional clause protecting all private property made land reform virtually impossible. Instituting currency controls to prevent wild speculation would violate an $850 million IMF deal, which also promoted wage restraint, which prevented raising minimum wages. The South African Central Bank was privatized and run by the same man who had run it under apartheid, Derek Keyes, the white finance minister under apartheid, who retained his post. There was no betrayal by Mandela's ANC negotiators. They were simply outmaneuvered. De Klerk, the whites, the colonialists, and the Crown had the international financial control necessary to leverage their way. When Mandela was released from prison, the South African rand dropped by 10% and the stock market collapsed in a panic. Whenever a party official hinted that the Freedom Charter would become policy, the rand went into a freefall. In a single month in 1996, the rand plummeted 20%. Naomi Klein quotes Yasmin Sooka, a prominent South African human rights activist. "We'll keep everything, and you, the ANC, will rule in name. You can have political power, you can have the facade of governing, but the real governance will take place somewhere else." So, despite the ANC revolution headed by Nelson Mandela, the economy, the land, and the banks, mines, and monopoly industries that Mandela pledged to nationalize remained firmly in the hands of whites, who were just 10% of the population. In a quote you will seldom read elsewhere, Klein cites Mandela, who told the ANC's National Conference in 1997 that the globalization of capital makes it impossible for countries to decide national economic policy. With its wrists handcuffed, Mandela's ANC opted for neoliberal shock therapy of more privatization, cutbacks to government spending, looser controls on money flows, fewer labor laws, and selling off state-owned firms to service a horrendous debt owed to the oppressors. The only way out of this mess for South Africa today is to follow the lead of Venezuela's former president, Hugo Chavez, introduce a new constitution, pay off the IMF debts, and follow the South African nationals which have gained economic independence. Then you can institutionalize the Freedom Charter. It's also pertinent to note that in 1990, the New York Times reported that the Central Intelligence Agency played an important role in the arrest in 1962 of Nelson Mandela, the African National Congress leader who was jailed for nearly 28 years. The intelligence service, using an agent inside the ANC Congress, provided South African security officials with precise information about Mr. Mandela's activities that enabled the police to arrest him. At the time of Mandela's arrest in August 1962, the CIA had devoted more resources to penetrating the activities of nationalist groups like the ANC than did South Africa's then fledgling security services. This is D.E.Snyder for W.A.N News. Obviously, this is a big week. Nelson Mandela is dead. We have President Obama over there attending the memorial service, and I'm not even sure if he's going to be attending the actual funeral on the 15th. We have previous President Bush over there, and we have Bill and Hillary Clinton also over there ad nauseum in South Africa right now. There's been a lot, of course, in the media lately about Nelson Mandela. And so, although my show today is going to talk about South Africa, that is all that I'm really going to say about Nelson Mandela, because I think there's been adequate coverage elsewhere. When I do mention Nelson Mandela in the rest of the show, it will only be as part of the figurehead of the ANC and relationships with other countries. Because there's just, I think that he's been overexposed, and the truth has been underreported regarding South Africa in general. Many people know that I'm originally from South Africa. I left South Africa in 1986, and I continued to go back several times a year until 1999-2000, when I decided, after a particularly horrendous trip filled with horrendous crime and all sorts of other things that I experienced while I was there, I decided that I would never, ever go back to South Africa again, unfortunately. So that was the beginning of my show, and I want to point out that we've talked excessively about Nelson Mandela and the Rivonia trial and all things Mandela, but nowhere has anyone really talked about the other people that were arrested alongside people from the Rivonia trial and Nelson Mandela. And another one, which is an interesting person to Google, is a man by the name of Dennis Goldberg, who was born in 1933. He's a Jewish South African social campaigner who was active in the struggle against apartheid. He grew up in Cape Town, studied for a degree in civil engineering. He was part of the underground armed wing, Umkhonto we Sizwe, which was founded in 1961. And in 1963, he was arrested at the Rivonia headquarters of their army and sentenced in 1964 at the end of the Rivonia trial to 4 terms of life imprisonment. That trial is something that I would like you to Google, because, of course, lots is made out of it in the global media, and people don't really understand that was not a trial about apartheid. That was a trial about activities of terrorism. And there is a distinction which I will get to at some point in my show. So I'm not quite sure where exactly I should start here. I'm going to start with myself, I guess. I was 14 years old when I entered Soweto for the first time. Soweto is a township. It's a black township outside of Johannesburg. During the apartheid years, it was an incredibly dangerous township for a lot of reasons. The primary one because of its size. And all the townships in South Africa were dangerous because there was no running water in the homes. So running water was at the end of streets. There was very little street lighting, so after dark it was particularly fraught with danger. And two, there was many tribes living together in these townships. And people have this misconception about South Africa and apartheid, that it was merely a black-white issue. And if it was merely a black-white issue, things would have been so much more simple. nothing could be further from the truth than that it was a simple black-white issue. Amongst the white population, there was enormous segregation between the English and the Afrikaans-speaking communities. In the Afrikaans communities, there was a further segregation whether you were from German descent, French Huguenots, or other parts of Europe. They were all segregated along these lines. And then amongst the English-speaking community, there were those that aligned fully with Britain. Those were one. Then there was the Jewish contingency. There was the Portuguese. There was the Greeks. There were those that just wanted to be white South Africans and didn't want to align with any kind of party flavor. Then there were the honorary whites, which were the Chinese. And then there were the people of color who fit in no particular category and were always very much on the fringes of the society, regardless of their size. One of those was South Africa's Indian population, predominantly in Durban, known today as KwaZulu-Natal. And the Indian population is big. They have a lot of political clout today, and they had a lot of political clout even during the apartheid era. They brought all of their culture from India, and everyone in South Africa grew up with Indian curries and seeing ladies wearing Indian saris, a very rich and flavorful culture that exists to this day there. And then we have the Cape Coloureds. The Cape Coloureds lived on the Cape Flats. They were not an indigenous tribe. They were primarily the result of interbreeding between the Afrikaans farmers and their black servants ever since Jan van Riebeeck arrived with his ships in the 17th century. So, and then amongst the black population, you have all these tribes that through colonization of various parts of Africa had kept migrating and migrating until they found themselves at the very tip of Africa, which is where South Africa is. You know, it's funny because having been here for so long, almost 30 years, I remember when I first came to this country and people would ask me where I was from, and I'd say I'm from South Africa, and they'd nod vaguely and say, oh, Africa. And I'd say, no, South Africa. And they'd always have to ask where it was, not understanding that it was the very, very tip at the bottom of Africa, and that no, lions do not walk around the streets, and no, I don't have a zebra for a pet, and yes, there are concrete buildings, and no, it's not all dirt roads. It's a very cosmopolitan country. We have 3 very large cities, and that's Johannesburg, or the Transvaal, really, and we have Cape Town, which is the very horn of Africa, from whence settlements and colonial domination began. That's where the original ships landed. And then we have KwaZulu-Natal, the Durban province. And then, of course, in the interceding years and through colonial endeavors, I expect you could use that term, many smaller cities sprang up. We have high-rise buildings, huge major highways, arteries connecting all of these different places, and it looks just like it does anywhere else in the world, really. So it was interesting for me that people really didn't know where it was from. And then the other thing that people would always be very surprised about when I'd say I was from Africa, they'd take a look at me and say, well, you can't be from Africa because you're white. So even though people understood that there was apartheid in this far-off country, they were really very vague on the whole story. And of course, once Nelson Mandela was released from prison, and that made the rounds of the international media, people immediately thought that they understood that, oh, this was a racial issue of blacks on whites. But going back to this whole black tribal thing, there are many, many, many black tribes that now find themselves in South Africa. And it's always been an incredible issue for South Africa and for the various racial contingencies. During apartheid, there was a common enemy, and that was the white man. So all of these black cultural tribes were able to more or less unanimously unite for freedom against apartheid and to be recognized and to have the vote against the white man. And so I've covered the whites and the blacks in that sense. So the townships were very dangerous because you had all of these different factions, all sequestered behind walls, all living together in terrible, terrible conditions with, as I said, no running water available to everybody in their homes, no flushable sewage systems, very little street lighting. And once they were all housed together, there was a lot of fighting and a lot of true terrorism that went on in the townships. They were incredibly dangerous places for the people that lived there, and white people generally did not ever go into the townships. At the time that I was going there, I was the only white person, white woman that I knew that was going there, although I did see white police moving around in there, and on occasion there would be Christian charity organizations that would come in with their little minivan VW things and drive around. But at the time, in the late 70s and early 80s, it was a very dangerous place for white people to go. So the very first time that I went into Soweto, I was 14 years old, and I had been asked to go into Soweto to deliver a baby of a young black girl who was dying. It was evident to the people that had found her that she was dying. She was alone in a house. Her parents had been murdered by the ANC. They had subsequently raped her, gang raped her, and left her alone in this house to guard a cache of weapons that the ANC had put there. That particular story is murky, but what the ANC would do during the apartheid years is target strategic homes in the townships and then terrorize the people into hiding these caches of weapons, which was all weapons were illegal for black people to own. The ANC was a terrorist organization. They absolutely could not be found with these. So they would target homes on their routes and then kill one of the family members to show the rest of the family that they meant business, so that they could hide these weapons there. Now, unfortunately, because black people had to have a passbook in order to move around in white areas during select times of the week and times of the day, the chances of a random black person being picked up because they didn't have their passbook was particularly high. So in the cases where a black person was arrested for something minor and taken down to the police station, the ANC would be alerted if it was someone that had a weapons cache at their home. And another family member would be murdered and a message sent to the person in prison to let them know that we don't know why you're there exactly, but you better not say anything about the weapons cache at your house because, one, we know you're in prison. Two, you know that we mean business. And three, the weapons mean more to us than the lives of your entire family. So there was this young girl who had stayed in her house for the duration of her pregnancy. I guess one of the neighbors had heard her crying because she'd been in labor for some days. She was no more than a child herself. And so there I was delivered there in the middle of the night in the back of a police van by an underground movement who had tasked themselves with taking care of what family was left of these ANC victims under apartheid. I stayed with her and I delivered this baby. She died very shortly thereafter, and I left the township with this small baby, which we took care of for several weeks. And it was actually at the time against the law for me to have any black people in my home. I had left home when I was very young. I owned an apartment in the city, and we hid this child at my apartment until it was several weeks old. It was a very premature baby, and when we were sure that it was going to thrive, we passed it along on this underground movement to have it taken out of the country where it could be kept safe from the ANC. We'll be right back.
Heart-related health problems affect millions of people each year. Maybe you're one of the many who suffer from issues related to angina pain, high blood pressure, congestive heart failure, unbalanced cholesterol, irregular heartbeat, or clogged arteries. There is a solution that doesn't involve expensive prescription drugs that only mask the problem and leave you with horrible side effects. If you are ready to live your life free of sickness, pain, and fear, live your life with increased vitality, energy, and youthfulness, and experience your body healing itself, then you're ready for Heart and Body Extract from Healthy Hearts Club. Heart and Body Extract has a 23-year proven track record of using certified organic herbs that make up an excellent formula to balance and support the heart and circulatory system. In as little as 2 weeks, you can feel amazing results when your 2-month supply of Heart and Body Extract today. Call 1-866-295-5305 or go to hbextract.com.
If you're taking 1, 2, 5, or more nutritional supplements every day, please stop. Simplify your supplementation with Bio Superfood, the most advanced nutritional whole food supplement you can buy. Men, women, children, and even Olympic athletes the world over have discovered Bio Superfood from BioAge.com and now take just one nutritional supplement instead of many. The Bio Superfood formulas are whole food products composed with 4 of the most nutrient-dense algae species found on Earth. Bio Superfood for the brain helps with focus, memory, clarity, and mood. Bio Superfood is a strong defender in the fight against radiation exposure. Bio Superfood has 0 toxicity, is safe, and has no contraindications whatsoever. Learn more and order your Bio Superfood formulas at BioAge.com. That's spelled BioAge.com. BioAge.com. Or you can call 877-288-9116. That's 877-288-9116. BioAge, the age of advanced organics.
Hello, this is Ty Bollinger, author of the best-selling book, Cancer, Step Outside the Box. I want you to know some very important information. In 1985, President Ronald Reagan requested that Carnivora be sent directly to the White House at a time when only the president could obtain this world-class healer. Now, 27 years later, Carnivora capsules are used around the world to keep people healthy. Now you can protect yourself and your loved ones in this age of superbugs with 17 naturally occurring compounds that instinctively respond to abnormal cells only without harming a single normal cell. If you want to stay healthy, now's your chance to literally wake up your critical immune cells to attack harmful invaders that don't belong in your body. Call 1-866-VENUS-FLY or order from carnivora.com. That's carnivora.com. That's 1-866-836-8735, 1-866-VENUS-FLY, or visit carnivora.com. Protect your immune system. It's the only one you've got.
most people don't know very much about the history of South Africa. And it's important to know that it was a holding of the crown. And that was only relinquished in 1961. Between 1910 and 1961, we had Governor Generals of the Union of South Africa. And some of those Governor Generals were people like Viscount Gladstone, Viscount Buxton, His Royal Highness Prince Arthur of Connaught, the Earl of Athlone, Earl of Clarendon, Sir Patrick Duncan. And then starting in 1946, we had some of the Afrikaner people from the nation of South Africa. People like Nicholas Jacobus de Wet, Gideon Brand van Zyl, Lucas Cornelius Steyn, Charles Robert Swart, and then very briefly for just a month, Lucas Cornelius Steyn. So in 1961, South Africa became a state, a republic on its own, but it retained and became a part of the Commonwealth, and I'll head into that in a second. I want to tell you something about Charles Robert Swart, who became the first duly elected president of the Republic of South Africa in 1961. He was a survivor of the British concentration camps in South Africa during the Anglo-Boer War of 1899 to 1902. The first Boer War was from December 1880 to March 1881. These wars were about gold and diamonds, and are all about Paul Kruger and Cecil John Rhodes, who was a Brit and was adamantly in favor of British expansionism. Charles Robert Swart is a very interesting guy, and the fact that he was a survivor of the British concentration camps, I'm not sure how many people know that the British had a scorched earth policy in South Africa during the Boer War, where they burnt all the farms and all the land in order to make the women and children vulnerable, because the men, of course, were the Boer guerrilla warfare tacticians against the invading British. And Charles Robert Swart, was a cousin of my great-grandmother, who also survived the Ladysmith concentration camps. And it fostered an enormous sense of nationalism in these Boer people. And you have to understand that the Afrikaner, the Boer, is very nationalistic towards South Africa, and they no longer consider themselves German or Dutch or French Huguenots. They're very much a part of the fabric of South Africa, and it's become fraught with political implications for them. Now, Nelson Mandela, at the time, in 1961, he and the other underground black resisted, protested vehemently the change in status for South Africa from the Crown holdings to a new republic. In fact, they ordered a 3-day general strike, was called for, but it was mostly quaffed. And that's really where you started to hear about Nelson Mandela, was in 1961, when he was so adamantly against the withdrawing of the Crown and allowing South Africa to become more or less independent. Of course, it became part of the Commonwealth of Nations. So, that's a little backdrop. And for those that are interested, you can go and Google a list of the Governor Generals of the Union of South Africa, because there's lots of clickable links there, which are quite fascinating if you want a non-mainstream view of politics in South Africa. I'm going to only say a couple things about the Commonwealth of Nations, because people don't really know much about it. The Commonwealth covers almost 12 million square miles. It's almost a quarter of the world's land area and spans all continents. It has an estimated population of 2.245 billion, which is almost a third of the world's population. And the Commonwealth in 2010 produced a nominal gross domestic product, or GDP, of $9.767 trillion, representing 15% of the world's GDP when measured in purchasing power parity, which is PPP. This represents the second largest nominal GDP in the world. And you can Google Commonwealth of Nations or go to Wikipedia. There's lots of very interesting information for those that are at all interested. Now, I could go into the history of the Communist Party of South Africa, or CPSA, which was declared illegal in 1950. But you know what? Seriously, I think this has been overly exposed and understood by everybody. So if that's something that you really want to know more about, please don't read it in the mainstream media. Go and do your own research. I want to talk about the Sharpeville massacre, which occurred on the 27th of March 1960 at a police station in the South African township of Sharpeville in the Transvaal, which is today known as Gauteng. After a day of demonstrations, a crowd of about 5,000 to 7,000 black protesters went to the police station. The South African police opened fire on the crowd, killing 69 people. Sources disagree as to the behavior of the crowd. Some state that the crowd was peaceful, while others stated that the crowd had been hurling stones at the police and that the shooting started when the crowd started advancing towards the fence around the police station. In present-day South Africa, March 21st is celebrated as a public holiday in honor of human rights and to commemorate the Sharpeville massacre. Something to understand about the Sharpeville massacre is something that happened shortly before the Sharpeville massacre, and that's something called Cato Manor. It's a working-class area located about 7 kilometers from Durban's city center. And what happened was there was a riot there that happened. The whole area is fraught with political innuendo. So again, go to Wikipedia and Google or find Cato Manor, CATO _Manor, MANOR. And what happened there on the 23rd of January 1960, so prior to the Sharpeville event, an angry mob attacked 4 white and 5 black policemen at the police station, where they then butchered the men and mutilated the bodies, pretty much chopped them all up. The mutilated bodies with the genitals stuffed in their mouths were then dragged through the streets by the mob, and the tumult eventually died after 1964 when the place became deserted. So, we can talk about the Sharpeville massacre as being a horrendous incident where the police opened fire on a crowd, but there is a lot more to the story than what you've read in the mainstream media and what has been really talked about at the Truth and Reconciliation Committee as well. I sense some more shucky darn ads coming up, so why don't we just let them run, and I'll be back after the break.
What if you could shift into a parallel universe right now and be the solution to any problem you're facing? I'm Matthew David Hurtado, CEO of RNA Drops and author of Misfit to Millions, based on my true life story. 4 years ago, I was dying with Lyme's disease, PTSD, and virtually homeless. ION and the RNA Drops gave me a new life, new DNA, and the power to become a millionaire in just a few short years. I want to pay that forward to you. Get a copy of my book, Misfit to Millions, and I'll give you a free bottle of RNA Drops, the product that changed my life. I've got $199 in free bonus gifts for the first 200 people that go to misfittomillions.com and get a copy of my book now. Go to misfittomillions.com. That's MISFITTO millions.com. What would you be, do, and have if you knew you couldn't fail? Take the plunge now. Go to misfittomillions.com.
Charlie McGrath of WideAwakeNews.com here with a question from my friends at Austin Rare Coins and Bullion. What do they know that we don't? Insiders and a who's who list of elite have made it crystal clear that we are headed for catastrophe, putting out warning after warning, urging people to batten down the hatches. Billionaire George Soros has recently been dumping stocks and at the same time acquiring millions in gold. In fact, in a recent interview, he was quoted as saying, "I'm not here to cheer you up. The situation is as serious and difficult as I've experienced in my career." Out of control government deficit spending and a Federal Reserve that's only solution seems to be print more fiat currency will lead to a weaker dollar and massive inflation on necessity items such as energy and food. If you have wealth to protect, please visit my friends at Austin Rare Coins and Bullion. Gabe Elton and the folks at Austin Rare Coins and Bullion have many Wide Awake News customers because they're honest, they're fair, and they won't sell you paper promises or product they do not have. Call Gabe Elton at 800-552-4109. That number again, 800-552-4109, or visit them online at austincoins.com.
Make a promise, take a vow, and trust your feelings, it's easy now. Understand the voice within and feel a change already beginning. Oh, tell me again.
All right. Something else that I'd like people to go to Wikipedia and look up is something called Operation Protea. Protea is the national flower of South Africa, and it's kind of ironic that a lot of military operations were implemented under Operation Protea. It was a military operation during the South African Border War and the Angolan Civil War, in which South African Defence Forces, or SADF, destroyed a number of Southwest Africa People's Organization, or SWAPO, bases in Angola. During the operations, which took place from August 23rd, I think, to the beginning of September 1981, provided the impetus for a whole lot of other operation targets. But if you go to Wikipedia and you look at Operation Protea, you understand a little more about what was going on with the South African police forces, the South African military, and covert operations as well. And I don't think that Wikipedia goes into this as much, but all the ANC bases that were in these foreign countries is very interesting. And of course, the ANC was underscored and underwritten by the Soviet Union. All the weapons used by the ANC were provided primarily from the Soviet Union. Just wanted to let you know that my father was actually involved with a lot of these operations. He worked for the South African government. And so this ties into why I chose to do what I did, because he worked for the government. And, of course, there's this portrayal in the media that if you were white, you were part of the apartheid regime. And if you were black, you were the oppressed. And again, if it was that simple, well, we could just all go home. But it's not that simple. It wasn't that simple then, and it's not that simple today. There were many regular South Africans who did not approve of the way apartheid was handling many things in the country. Not only the black people, but policies in general. And there were many people working towards doing better for the farmers, for the disenfranchised black people who were very much a victim of the situation. The ANC was always, and still is, a very, very politically energized party fraught with incredible violence. It's always been violent, regardless of what Mandela has ever said about them starting out as a peaceful movement. There was never anything peaceful about them at all. In fact, the vast majority of everyday regular black people were absolutely terrified of the ANC and were victimized then and are victimized today. So my own family, of course, came over at the very beginning when South Africa was first settled. They were part of the Afrikaner contingency. And then my great-grandmother did the unthinkable, and she married a British man. So in my own family, we are very much divided. We have the Afrikaner contingency and we have the British contingency, and neither of them talk to each other. And this is very common in South Africa, where families fall apart and are completely divided and polarized by subsequent generations who they feel have, betrayed the cause and done an injustice. And so this goes back to people. This is less about color. This is less about geographics. And this is more about people's inherent need and desire to identify with a group, be it a religion, be it a political party, be it a sports group. We have we have been trained ultimately to, as a society, as a global society, I really do believe that because I see it so much in America too. We have been trained to align ourselves with some party, some color, some religion. And this whole thing is all about a divide and conquer strategy because by definition, if you belong to a group and you draw strength from that group and you belong to this religion, then you feel on these political groups, these religious groups, these color-based groups, it becomes a case of us against them. Inferior and superior. And this continues, of course, around the world, in South Africa, in America. Nowhere is immune from it at all. In fact, I was saying the other day that I've encountered more blatant racism in the United States than I ever did in South Africa. And of course, I was born and raised there. I left South Africa as an adult. And so I think it's important for me to say that on my own radio show. Something else that I want you to look at Wikipedia or Google is Israel-South Africa relations. And along those lines is the ANC and Mandela's relationship with Israel and with political parties of Israel. Then I want to head into something else because I'm going to run out of time as usual, and that is Project Coast. Project Coast was a top-secret chemical and biological weapons program instituted by the South African government during the apartheid era. You can go and Google this and read up on it, but I want to tell you that it was financed by the CIA, and I'm not sure how much goes into there on Wikipedia, but absolutely Project Coast was instrumental in spreading AIDS in South Africa in the late 70s and the very early 80s. And something that's, of course, mainstream media and the medical paradigm never want to talk about is the fact that there are two distinct forms of HIV/AIDS. You have the Western HIV/AIDS and you have African HIV/AIDS, and they are distinctly different. Thabo Mbeki, who was the second democratically elected president of South Africa, tried to talk about this, and he lost his presidency as a result. Of course, mainstream or lamestream media will continue to tell you that Thabo Mbeki was forced out because of political machinations within the ANC organization, and to some extent this is true. But behind the scenes, the ANC and Zuma, who later became the president, were promised lots of things by third parties to get Thabo Mbeki out of the presidential seat. And it's my belief that President Thabo Mbeki is the only president who tried to speak out about what we can loosely term the shadow government of the world, really, which is the corporate infrastructure, the IMF, the Jesuit order, and all of those other shadowy names of which we speak in whispers. But Thabo Mbeki is the only president who spoke out and survived. Everybody else in strong political positions was assassinated. Of course, you can Google Thabo Mbeki and see what he's doing in Africa right now, but he's treading a thin line and really doesn't do much like Mandela did when he was no longer the president of South Africa. We talk about the Mandela Children's Foundation and the Mandela Hospital that is supposedly being built. Well, let me tell you something about the Nelson Mandela Children's Foundation, to which so many international luminaries donated money, and so many private individuals donated their bits and pieces of money to create this Nelson Mandela Children's Foundation. I urge you to go and find it on the World Wide Web and see what it is that they have done and where they're going. Let me save you the trip. They have done nothing, absolutely nothing. You have to understand that South Africa supposedly became free in 1994. Hello, we are 20 years down the road from that momentous moment in time, and absolutely nothing has done. The same disenfranchised people then, the same hungry people, the same people without running water, with very little electricity, all the same people then are the same people today that are disenfranchised. Nelson Mandela's Children's Foundation made big promises They were going to take soup kitchens out into the streets and take care of all the children who were victim to HIV/AIDS, whose parents died as a result of this infection, supposedly. Many of these street children are test positive for HIV/AIDS, and they run around in bands. They're not in school. They have no homes. They have no parental authority, and they're starving. There's no food for them. It was decided that the Mandela Foundation was going to create committees and look at other ways of best serving these communities. And to the best of my knowledge, these communities' leadership still meet with the Mandela Children's Foundation, but not on the street level, nothing has happened. On the other hand, we have this thing called One Settler, One Bullet. It was a rallying cry and slogan which originated by the Azanian People's Liberation Army, which was the armed wing of the Pan-African Congress, during the struggle of the 1980s against apartheid. The slogan was never officially endorsed by PAC, but was used by party members during rallies. If you go to YouTube, you can see Nelson Mandela singing along with this song after he became president. You can see our current president, Zuma, singing along at bonfires, One Farmer, One Bullet, Bring Me My Machete. You have Winnie Mandela saying, with matches and necklaces, we will free the oppressed and free South Africa. What this is necklacing, whereby the ANC takes tires from vehicles, rubber tires, puts it over the head of a hapless victim, thus securing their arms at their sides, pours gasoline over them, and strikes a match. From my apartment in South Africa, I lived in Johannesburg. I lived on the main street, Plain Street, and my apartment overlooked the ANC building. And there were many a time when I saw ANC members attacking poor black people on the street. And I saw several times people being necklaced out in the middle of the street, in the middle of the night, for no apparent reason whatsoever, other than they were the people that happened to be available for a good old-fashioned necklacing at the time. So excuse me while I get a little pissed off. So this One Settler, One Bullet, it's a very sad thing. And if you Google Amy Elizabeth Beale, she was murdered in 1993. She was a white American graduate of Stanford University. She was an anti-apartheid activist in South Africa, and she was murdered by black Cape Town residents while a black mob shouted racial slurs. In 1998, all of the people that had been complicit in her murder were pardoned by South Africa's Truth and Reconciliation Committee when they stated that their actions had been politically motivated. Beale's family supported the release of the killers, and her father shook the murderers' hands and stated this: the most important vehicle of reconciliation is open and honest dialogue. We are here to reconcile a human life which was taken without an opportunity for dialogue. When we are finished with this process, we must move forward with linked arms. All right, well, that's the end of the show. I think I'm going to pick this up next week. If you want to get a hold of me, you can email me at canarychronicles@outlook.com. Thanks so much.
Thought the next one could be me. Do you see the soldiers that are out today to brush the dust with bulletproof vests away? It's ironic at times like this you pray, but a bomb blew the mosque up yesterday. There's bombs on the buses, bikes, roads, inside your market, your shops, your clothes. My dad, he's got a lot of fear, I know, but enough pride inside, nothing let that show. My brother had a book he would hold with pride, a little red cover with a broken spine on the back. He hand wrote a quote inside: when the rich wage war, it's the poor who die. Meanwhile, the leader just talks away, stuttering and mumbling the nightly news to replay. The rest of the world watching at the end of the day, both scared and angry, like what did he say?
Oxygen. It's nature's oldest therapy and plays an essential role in destroying viruses, bacteria, mold, yeast, and fungus, and keeping the human body healthy and strong. Now, you can give your body and your immune system a mega boost of disease-fighting oxygen with all-natural Oxy-C. With so many people now leading a sedentary indoor lifestyle, most are in a chronic state of oxygen deprivation, which sets up a perfect environment for disease, general fatigue, and a host of other symptoms. Oxy-C is yours in simple, convenient capsules. Nothing to mix, nothing to hassle with. Take it with juice or water anytime. Feel a cold or flu approaching? Have no energy or spark anymore? Try all-natural Oxy-C and prepare to be amazed. Oxy-C is only available from New Earth Health Solutions at Rense.com. Look for the New Earth banner at Rense.com.
In 2007, one man, Mike Dillard, made 5 predictions which forecasted the 2008 economic crisis and the pending Eurozone collapse. 3 brand new, shocking, must-watch videos with predictions for the coming year. www.the3videos.com. Over the past year, Mike Dillard has helped thousands of ordinary people create and recover wealth by tapping into the black box investing strategies the big banks don't want you to know about. www.the3videos.com. As the European banking system implodes and governments collapse at breakneck speeds, the next 12 months will be the most anticipated and important months in modern human history. This will make 2008 look like a walk in the park. Everyone will be affected. Go to www.the3videos.com now. Learn how to prepare your family and prosper during the global financial collapse.
You're listening to the Rense Radio Network, nationwide and worldwide on the net and at Rense.com.